Hey, a quick warning. We went to a hole-in-the-wall ramen shop to record some ambience for today's show. Energetic greetings, the chef shaking water from noodles, and for the keen listener, a slurp or two. For his fellow misophones, people who are sensitive to certain sounds, Richard dialed down the eating noises, so it should be fine. Come have an authentic noodle experience with us while I talk about the surprisingly nuanced topic of chopsticks. This is Thersa Matsura, and you're listening to Uncanny Japan. Have you ever been plucking a delicate piece of maitake mushroom tempura off your plate and suddenly thought to yourself, is the reason I can't make friends in Japan due to me being chopstick challenged? Or maybe it's worse. Maybe I'm inviting bad luck, evil spirits, and even death to those around me because of my slipshod chopstick technique. All right, maybe you haven't asked yourself these questions, but maybe you should. Uncanny Japan is the podcast about mysterious yokai, fascinating folk tales, and endearing superstitions. Today we'll learn about how not to ruin your life and horrify your Japanese friends with your chopstick etiquette. I'll also talk about some godly and decidedly ungodly chopstick lore, and a few thoughts on the harmony of wa. I want to thank everyone for ordering the book of Japanese folklore and for reviewing it too. Both those things really help so much. I'm currently writing a fantastical middle grade book, and after that I have regular adult novels, both mythical realism and horror that I want to write. Previous book sales and reviews make publishers pay attention, so thank you all so much. I really want to get my next book out there. I think you'll like it. So before I get into the godly and deathly bits of tableware, you might have heard me say before that Japan is a country of countless rules, cultural customs, and very particular ways of doing things. It's part of the reason, I've noticed, that it can be quite difficult to live here. At least, that's my theory after talks with so many people who have left Japan, and perhaps just as many people who have stayed, but are very bitter or resentful and seemingly unhappy. You see, of those special ways of doing things, many are more like secret rules that no one will tell you about, but oh boy are they important if you want to try to fit in. I'm not saying you can't make Japanese friends or visit or live here happily if you don't know them, but the more you know, the smoother life will be. Let's call that smoothness wa, or harmony. Let me introduce you to the concept of wa real quick. Here's my take. Japanese have been living together in close proximity on a relatively narrow island and a bunch of smaller islands for over 1,000 years. Add to that the period called Sakoku, or locked country, when Japan for the most part shut itself off from the outside world for about 265 years. These are all conditions that encourage a lot of learning to get along with your neighbors. It might be my far-fetched theory, but I believe this has something to do with Japan today being a very high-context culture. The definition of high-context culture, I just learned, and I quote, is one where a lot of information and communication is conveyed through shared understanding rather than being explicitly stated. This goes for the language as well as manners, actions, social cues. So wa is often thought of as a state of balance or unity or harmony. Everyone knowing how to behave and behaving that way without much needing to constantly remind each other of what to do means living in peaceful coexistence. It means Japan's a nice place to visit. And I have a favor to ask you. This isn't about you. I know it's not about you. But if you know somebody, say a rowdy co-worker, who is planning on visiting Japan and wants to chase the Maiko in Kyoto around with their camera, or yell across a store that they found the perfect waifu pillow, or ignore all the signs and fences that tell you not to enter an area and go in there anyway, so they can get a smoldering photo of them sitting on a stone covered in moss that took hundreds of years to grow. Just give that tone-deaf neighbor a kindly talking to about wa and harmony and, well, just nice manners. Also, temples and shrines are holy places with centuries-old architecture and relics, and Japanese people do go there to pray. You wouldn't believe the stories that I'm hearing these days from Japanese friends about certain tourists. Not you, again, not you, but maybe your overly zealous roommate? Okay, now that I've worked myself and no doubt you up, please join me in calming down and revisiting our own personal wa. Relaxing, peaceful vibes. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Now, imagine in the serene void of your mind a pair of chopsticks. Hashi, or ohashi if you're polite. An innocent pair of ohashi spinning slowly, a magical aura emanating from them. Deceptively simple, aren't they? Shorter than Chinese or Korean chopsticks, usually tapered at one end, sometimes both ends. Wait until I tell you what that means. How much trouble can you get into while just trying to slurp some ramen from a bowl? Well, actually, you won't get into any trouble because loudly slurping noodles isn't a taboo. Slurp away. Back to chopsticks. Believe it or not, there are ways to wreak havoc on yours and maybe other people's fortune. So here we go. A version of chopsticks were used back in ancient Japan during the Jomon era, which began around 14,500 BCE and ended around 300 BCE. They were used, but not for eating. Keep in mind that at that time, bamboo was thought to connect humans to the gods. You can see why this might be believed by how fast and straight bamboo grows, and how strong and pliable bamboo is. Anyway, it's a sacred plant. So a kind of ohashi was made from a long, thin piece of bamboo that was bent in the middle. Imagine a U shape. This was called takeori bashi, bamboo bent chopstick, and it was used in very early Shinto rituals. Being a holy plant, it was only natural that when making offerings to the spirits and gods, instead of touching things with dirty human hands, these takeori bashi were used. Now, let me tell you how a pair of chopsticks saved an entire village. In the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, 8th century, there was written the legend of the Yamato no Orochi, an 8-headed dragon with blood-red glowing eyes and a body that spanned across mountains and valleys. Very nasty. Well, in the story, our hero Susanoo was walking alongside a river in the middle of nowhere one day when he spotted something floating toward him. What could it be? A pair of chopsticks. Susanoo thought. That means there must be a village upstream. So he continued on to investigate. And that's where he met the poor people who were being tormented and eaten alive by the enormous serpent dragon, which he thusly disposed of. Although it wasn't that easy. I'll do an episode on that story before too long. Something like the Myth Tales Volume 1 in episode 132. where we got to be there when Izanagi and Izanami made Japan out of a bunch of goo. So keep a lookout for that. Back to chopsticks. It's believed that people started using ohashi for eating around 1,400 years ago, in the 7th century. This version, 2 separate utensils used together, instead of a bent piece of bamboo, were brought over from China. It took some time for them to catch on, and the manners and taboos around them have changed quite a bit over time. So let's fast forward to now. On one hand, chopsticks are godly. They should be used with care, as they are implements that carry food to your mouth, keeping you alive. You'll also still find connections between them and Shinto. An example of this are special chopsticks called omihashi, or sometimes pronounced onmihashi, written with the honorific o, like ohashi. Mi is god or gods, and hashi, basically sacred chopsticks. On certain occasions, these are given by shrines to people as talismans or good luck symbols. There is also iwaibashi, or celebratory chopsticks. These tend to be seen around the new year or other auspicious times, like your baby's first meal. If you ever find yourself with a pair of these lucky utensils, you are allowed to use them, with respect, of course. One thing you'll notice, though, is that both ends are tapered. The symbolism is that chopsticks connect us to the gods. One end, the end we pluck up food with, represents humans, and the other end, the gods. A related theory says that the word hashi is short for kami no hashira, or pillars of the gods, again connecting we mere mortals to divine beings. A third idea is that the tapered ends are so that we can eat with the gods. While we're eating with one end, the gods are partaking with the other. In Japan, you'll often find that people have their own special pair of chopsticks that they use exclusively. These can be used for decades before wearing out or otherwise needing to be changed. So what happens is that over time, a spirit inhabits these chopsticks. Remember, in Shinto belief, spirits reside in all sorts of things. This isn't quite Tsukumogami, episode 44, Haunted Artifacts, because they'd have to be 100 years old for that to happen. But because of this, you're not supposed to just throw them away. Some shrines even have a special ceremony called Ohashi Kuyo, where the spirit is removed and they are disposed of properly, most likely burned. But another method I read about is to wash your old chopsticks in salt water, thank them, wrap them in something, and then drop them into the garbage. Any way you look at it, chopsticks are important, symbolic, godly instruments, which makes them persnickety when it comes to usage. Here we have something called kiraibashi, hate chopsticks, or imibashi, or kinbashi, forbidden chopsticks. This has to do with etiquette and can run from just being rude to death-bringing. Since there are a whole lot of rules regarding how to use chopsticks, like over 40, I'll just run through a handful right now. So in the don't be a barbarian category, you have araibashi, washing chopsticks. This is when you rinse them off in soup or tea. It's considered very rude, as is kamibashi, chewing or holding in your mouth or sucking on the ends of ohashi. That's very yuck. There's chigiribashi, using a chopstick in each hand to, in effect, cut a piece of food. I'm guilty of this one on more than one occasion, but I never do it in front of someone else. Next we have yosebashi. This is when you move bowls or saucers around the table with your chopsticks. Don't do that. Also, mayoibashi. Using them to wander over foods, like pointing back and forth. Do I want to eat this or maybe this? No, I think I'll eat this. Also, never stab food with your chopsticks. Sashibashi. Or let soup drip from the ends. That's called namidabashi. crying chopsticks. Now, for a couple of the more heinous faux pas. First, there's one that seems innocuous enough, but it isn't. It's called ogamibashi, or praying chopsticks. I've actually seen a lot of people do this, and I didn't know it was bad manners until a few days ago. When you hold your hands up like you're praying in front of your food, but your chopsticks are placed between your thumbs and your index fingers so they're sticking out on both sides, that's praying chopsticks, and it's to be avoided. It's not nice. There's tatakibashi. Don't use your chopsticks to tap on bowls or the table or anything at all. It's believed that this calls akure, or evil spirits. This is another one I didn't know about. And now for the really bad ones. These have to do with Buddhism and funerals. The first one is tatebashi, standing chopsticks, also called hotokebashi, or Buddha's chopsticks. After a person dies in Japan, they're given a symbolic meal, usually of rice, round mochi rice cakes, and water, sometimes tea or other things. But it's the rice we want to talk about today. It's called makura meshi, or pillow rice, because it's placed at the head of the deceased. Usually all the items are on a raised tray or an altar. If you were giving rice to a family member, you'd fill the bowl up, but you'd fluff it. When presenting rice for the dead, the rice is heaped high and packed down. Sometimes 2 bowls full of rice are placed one on top of the other and pressed together before taken off. So you have a fairly high, tightly packed bowl of rice. Then, a pair of chopsticks is placed standing upright, right in the middle. Different characters for the word hashi mean bridge. So this can symbolize a bridge to the Buddha's paradise, or the person's soul going straight up into heaven. The white rice and the other foods provide sustenance for the departed to make the long journey. So you never, ever place your chopsticks stuck in a bowl of rice. Here's an example of how off-putting this is. A good friend of mine came to work with me at a Japanese restaurant back in university. She was waitressing, and on her first day, her first customer was a Japanese man. She went to get him some rice, and wanting to be nice, she filled his bowl way over the top and packed it all down, so he'd get a lot. She didn't go as far as to insert chopsticks into it, but just that shape thoroughly freaked him out, and he got extremely angry. He called for the owner and refused the rice, and the owner had to go get him another bowl, filling it the right way. It was quite a big deal at the time. The harmony of the wa was broken that day. This tatebashi is really frowned upon and can be seen as inviting death to someone. At the very least, it's a bad omen. Then there's hashiwatashi, another seemingly harmless act that is passing a piece of food to someone from your chopstick to theirs. Hey, try this. Nope, never do that. There's a point in the Japanese funeral, after the cremation, when close friends and relatives gather around and use these very long chopsticks to together pick up bones and move them into the urn. Passing food from one person to another looks a lot like this ceremony and therefore taboo. Phew, I'll stop there. Now, I don't want you to get overly concerned with everything you do or say while visiting Japan. Kind of think of it more as a mystery. How should I behave in this situation? And why? Okay, I'll let you go for now. All my thanks and all my love to my patrons, and to everyone who bought and reviewed the Japanese Book of Folklore, and to everyone else too. Stay well and take care, and I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.